I'm excited actually to speak to, because each of them has very interesting takes on the subject of personalisation and targeting, from the functionality aspect of it right through to the ethics and how we can best apply it as professionals. So this might be something that you've been wrestling with in recent years, you know, especially with the arrival of GDPR and regulations such as that around tracking and personalisation. And you might be wondering, you know, where that sweet spot is when it comes to personalisation. How much is too much, you know, and how much is too little? And this is a question I'm going to throw straight over to our panel guests this morning. Guys, where do you think that sweet spot sits for businesses using personalisation and targeting?
This is where everyone doesn't want to jump in ahead of anybody else, the beauties of a Zoom call. Well, I'll kind of jump in. I think personalisation can be great, but it can also be detrimental to your brands if you get it wrong. So I think at the moment, marketers, so I'm an in-house marketer, I think we're treading that fine line between ensuring that we're getting the best ROI, the best conversion rates, optimizing those conversions, but also being mindful, respectful and ethical in the ways that we do this. There's lots and lots of tools out there at the minute that can allow us to personalize to a greater or lesser extent. But I think we're all on the brink of needing to be doing that in the right way, because at the moment, society and individuals, everyone's so divided. Everyone's in really different places, and the standard data that we can collect of, you know, gender, background, job profile, people have got so much more going on right now. I know we're not talking too much about the C word, but that really has changed people's outlook on life, people's perspectives. It's that adage of, you know, we're not all in the same boat, but we're in the same storm. And I think that will lead to personalisation potentially having more pitfalls, because the inferences that we used to be able to make 50% accurately are probably lowering now, given that everybody is in such a different personal space. So for me, I'm a bit wary of personalisation at the minute and the pitfalls that you can get into.
Yeah, I think the challenge with personalisation is kind of we call it within our business kind of the privacy paradox. You know, you've got if you go out and you survey, say, 100 people, you know, 80% of them are going to say, yeah, I want really great personalisation. You know, I want the organisation that I'm dealing with to know who I am, to deliver the right services, product recommendations, and so on to me. You ask those same 100 people, do they trust organisations with their personal data? And 80% of them will say no. And there's this real challenge because you know, to do personalisation right, you need to understand a huge amount about that individual. Otherwise, as Alex said, you know, you can meet those ethical challenges where you might start making inferred recommendations to someone that could really offend them. And there was a great article, which I'm happy to share these kind of afterwards, within Harvard Business Review earlier this year, where they did a full analysis of some of the third-party data that you can acquire, and using predominantly tracking data from cookies. And they actually calculated that guessing gave you a better chance of getting it right than the algorithm gave you from some of these significant models, especially around kind of predicting kind of male, female, and so on. I think it was only ever 44% right, which is crazy when you think, you know, it's a 50-50 call. So, you know, it's interesting if you're going to use personalization. I mean, especially with the way the ad tech world is working today, you know, it is about now organizations moving towards first party. And it was great seeing what Mike was talking about earlier. Yeah, it's around earning data from individuals so that you can understand more about them. And I think if you're going to use personalization, you need to be careful, you know, your approach to first party data.
So let's talk about that then. Let's bring Mike in as well there on that point, because you know, you've mentioned there's a nice little link Mike, what do you think about this question? And moving on from it slightly, what are some really good or smart applications of personalisation that you've seen, or smart ways of earning first-party data, like Jay says?
Yeah, I think just to add to it, I think generally people are pretty savvy now, as they generally know that they're getting targeted, and that's kind of forcing marketers to improve what they're doing, and it's also kind of showing up quite quickly those that aren't using things correctly, and it's embarrassing people quite quickly. So just topically, just looking through my Twitter feed, for example, I regularly see people saying, screenshotting ads that they're seeing, and they're saying, why am I being targeted to this? A really sort of blatant example of that would be like, an advertiser targeting a male person with a whole load of dresses or something like that, but just from a simplistic perspective like that, I often see people calling out brands saying, why are you targeting me with this? You must have more data about me than this to understand that I'm not a relevant audience for you, and it's annoying me that you're showing ads that aren't relevant. So I think that's a big issue that brands need to understand, that there's so much technology available, so much ad tech, and there's so many ways that we can be hyper personalized, that you've got to get it right. One, for your return on investment, but two, for your brand reputation as well. And on the flip side, I think some people particularly like the fact that ads are targeted as well. Again, a friend of mine posted the other day to say, I know I've just been sucked in. That person is a marketeer as well. So I know I've just been sucked in by an ad on Instagram, but I've just bought this product and it's bang on, and they know what I want and I bought it. So yeah, it's a real juxtaposition of managing reputation with the value of hyper targeting as well. So I think, just to go back to your question about examples of clever ways, I think a lot of the time it's not necessarily just being really clever, it's having a really deep understanding of the technology available, and having a really deep understanding of your audience. So unless you've got that, unless you've really gone through that deep exercise of creating personas about your individual customers and knowing their particular needs and challenges, then you can't really create advertising strategies that are bang on, because you're going to get it wrong unless you've done the legwork. It's too easy to make generalizations about people and serve them the wrong kind of ads. And the only way that we can really do that is by, I think, creating more of a relationship driven marketing strategy, where we're working in tandem with customers and creating opportunities for conversation to help improve the way that and the content that we're delivering. Does that make sense?
I think you're really correct, Mike, on that deep understanding. But I think, kind of unfortunately, talking from an in-house marketing perspective, you will get kind of senior people saying, oh, Facebook ads, let's do Facebook ads, let's do Instagram ads, let's do social media advertising. You're marketing, you can do it. And then there's this assumption, because it's simple to just, set up a Facebook profile, start doing these ads, that you can get something from it. But I think, as you say, they're so complex to actually target correctly and actually personalize correctly, and you need so much kind of sitting behind it to ensure success. But then the platforms that you can use it on are so easy to use, so it almost lulls you into a false sense of security of, yeah, I can do a targeted Facebook social media paid campaign, that's absolutely fine and easy. And then the pitfalls can come. But as Jay said earlier, 44% of that is wrong, but that means that the other 66% is right. And I think there's this massive thing at the moment that people, it's almost too easy to set off down that route without the proper knowledge of the tools, knowledge of your audience. And I mean, in most cases, it probably won't be too detrimental to your brand, but there's always that chance that it's that one person that, you mentioned about targeting dresses to men. It might be that person that you've targeted dresses, and they don't identify as a man, and it's absolutely fine to do that, but you've made an assumption, and you can't make assumptions these days. It's not right. So there's a lot in there, but I agree that deep understanding, but that needs to be understood by more than the marketing team. It needs to be understood by the entire business.
Yeah, I think that the challenge has got, I mean, even the information commissioner doesn't actually understand how ad tech works. So they had to get, you know, over 100 people from the sector into a room to actually, for them to explain to them what happens. And they've kind of given up on the on actually finding out what does happen. From what I can tell, they've given up on taking ad tech to task. But I think the problem is it is so murky, it is so opaque. You know, just another reference point. You know, only last week a piece of research came out from Pro Privacy, which found that over 80% of the top 100 charities in the UK had ad tracking technologies on some of the most kind of sensitive pages. You know, around dealing with 4th stage cancer, you know, dealing with anxiety and mental health and so on. And this information is being freely given up by an individual because they don't understand that when they hit that accept all cookie button, that information was shared back to, you know, literally hundreds of third parties that can actually use that data for harm. You know, they can weaponize that data against you. You know, you could have someone in a really bad place, and that data could be used to you know, present payday lending, all sorts of things to an individual. And I know I'm probably dramatizing it slightly, but you know, this stuff does happen. And I'm a marketer by background, and you know, it's all about being pragmatic and doing it right. But the thing is, I don't think everyone does want personalization, but I don't think people necessarily understand enough. And I think, you know, you know, on the theme of this, you know, looking at the social dilemma, the great hack, you know, they've been great things because they have started alerting people to what goes on underneath the surface. And the problem is most marketeers don't actually understand what goes on beneath the surface. They don't know how those ads are being recommended, those products are being the data is being used to kind of like on a cab, on an app for, you know, picking up a cab. You know, it's late at night, the gait of the person who's walking in the street is a bit odd, which probably suggests they've had a bit too much to drink, so we're going to up the price significantly. You know, it's that level of personalization, not just around ads, but also in terms of how it's being used in products. And really, for personalization to actually progress, I think ethical frameworks are going to be required within organizations to do the right thing.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and it kind of leads on to the next question. There's a couple of worrying sounding examples that you've cited there of personalisation. Do we think that, in light of things like that, dramatised or not, do we think that the technology and the discipline is unfairly maligned, or has it truly been a little bit murky and does need cleaning up? Like you say, potentially via ethical frameworks, codes of practice.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's always two sides to every story, and you know, if you look at again what came out of this, you know, this ad tech review, you know, there were brands like Unilever and P&G there, and you know, they're saying that in a way it's really important to them to have this information coming back to them so they don't wrongfully target someone. You know, so they want to know, you know, if someone is on, you know, an alcohol abuse website, you know, you don't want to be targeting ads about alcohol to them, but the only way you're going to know that information is for it to have been shared effectively. So there's always two sides to why you need this information. But I do think there's, you know, the problem is people are kind of, just because, you know, GDPR and all these things have almost created what, you know, a bit of a consent fatigue issue. You know, it's this challenge that, oh my God, there's so many tick boxes I now have to go through. How do I get through it as quickly as possible? And that's causing a problem because people are just kind of willfully accepting all in terms of to get to the value, without this understanding. And I do think, you know, the technology, I think it's a real hot potato because, as I say, it looks to me like the ICO has given up on it, because, you know, it's such a big industry. So it will now come down to the tech providers to actually do it right. And this is what I mean around an ethical framework. It's not just around the brands, it's actually around the technology themselves doing the right thing. And I'd say, yeah, ethical framework's probably the way forward on it.
Could that then almost be kind of self-regulating, that those companies that don't go with an ethical framework are the brands then that are kind of vilified and use it incorrectly, and therefore just by sheer bad press, you know, their figures decline, and those that do use it ethically and are gaining more users and gaining more positivity around their brand are the ones that stay in business? You know, because it's not all bad, is it? It's a good, when used correctly, like any technology, when used right, it can be really useful. So maybe there will, if, you know, the ICO is giving up on it, what do you think? Is there some possibility that, yeah, we'll end up self-regulating?
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? I think maybe Mike might be able to shine a bit of light on this as someone who works with a variety of businesses. Is it generally the case that people's understanding is relatively low, or have you found any kind of common pitfalls that you've had to steer clients away from? Obviously, without naming any names.
No, it's interesting. I think Alex led on a really interesting point to start with, to say that, you know, often a request to try out a different channel might come from someone senior in the business who doesn't necessarily have the understanding of what they want to achieve and why, and it's like the new latest thing, and they just want to sort of get on the bandwagon and try the latest thing. Years ago, I worked in a business that worked specifically selling training products to a very specific demographic, and the CEO came in. This is just when Snapchat launched, and Snapchat was just being used by kids all over the place, and they were like, "We need to be on Snapchat. We need to be on Snapchat." I'm like, really? I'm not sure whether that's any of our audience is going to be on Snapchat, but just kind of wanted to use that as an example, because often it will come down to the fact that they want to try out a new channel, and then because they have a little limited understanding of how that works and how the targeting works and what good looks like across that channel, then it becomes really difficult to find someone to support with that. So when they're looking to agencies or freelancers or internal teams to come in and deliver that, how are they basing those decisions on? Who are they choosing? So it's quite a low bar to entry as well with digital advertising. You know, there's so many people out there who can go and learn how to do Facebook ads, for example. So if someone's coming in and saying, "Oh, I'll do it for 500 quid," and someone else is coming in and saying, "I'll do it for 10 grand," and how the hell does anybody know what good looks like, who to choose? Well, how do you know who knows the tech properly to deliver what you want to do in a way that's going to really add value to the brand? So I think it comes down to the fact that I think many of us, and I think, you know, I'll put myself in this bracket as well, technology moves at such a fast rate, it's so difficult to keep up with it, and from a consumer's point of view, they really can't keep up with it. And like we were just talking about with regard to GDPR and stuff like that, and people just randomly ticking boxes to give away their data. We've gone through such a technological revolution where stuff is coming at us at such a fast rate, and we want it as well. We want instant access to everything. That's why Amazon has gone berserk. That's why Google has gone berserk, because they know how to create technology which delivers that dopamine hit that we need instantly. And because of that, and because we want everything yesterday, and we want a result in 1 second, and if it takes 5 seconds to go through a form to give away our data, we'll leave, we'll go through it, and people are just ticking boxes, and we're randomly giving away information without giving it the thoughts. And I think that's just a massive challenge, and I don't think that we're going to overcome that. It is down to the tech companies to overcome that for us by being more ethical, but whether they will do so or not is an impossible question, because they're making billions of pounds. So yeah, it's a really, really tough question. I don't think I've got the capacity to answer.
Yeah, I kind of refer to kind of the giving up of data a bit like the dating game. You know, you don't jump in on day one or on the first date and basically ask everything about the individual. You know, you have to build up that information, that picture of an individual over time. And you don't jump in and just make a whole load of assumptions about them either, which is kind of what the tech does today. You know, day one, that person looks like this, they therefore must be like this. And I think, you know, if you treat the data, I call it the data game, as a bit like the dating game. You know, you go in on day one and you ask a question, and you progressively build, and you kind of enhance and enrich the profile about an individual over the time of them engaging with you. And a bit like you were saying earlier, Mike, you can build up a much better picture, a more engaging, and actually build trust as well by doing that, because you're actually exchanging with the individual. You know, if you give me this bit of data, you're going to get this in return. And it's kind of the contextual side of giving up data. So, and little bits of information build trust, and it's about transparency. I mean, yeah, if you look at GDPR, it is one of the fundamental principles is right to be informed. You know, in telling the individual why I need your data and what I'm going to do with it. And yeah, I've shared with the panel, and I'll share with other people this report on data ethics by the World Federation of Advertisers. You know, they actually state in that, you know, trust these days is a massive thing for you know, the Y gen. They expect, or Z gen, they expect the you know, in organizations to be doing the right thing. In fact, they're more likely to forgive them for their product not being right than if they found out they were an unethical organization. And you know, a 1% increase in trust actually relates to a 3% increase in value. And doing that right, and kind of personalization plays a big part of that trust. You know, if you're talking to me about stuff that I want to engage with you about, I'm more likely to trust you. And if you're telling me why you need my data over time, I'm more likely to trust you. So I think there's, I mean, I get really excited about personalization. I think it's the right way to go, but it has to be done at the right way, and actually, you know, having someone's preferences, really understanding what they want to hear from you about is important.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think that's where I've seen clients and other businesses use it really effectively. And it comes down to not having a one-size-fits-all approach to the ad set that you're going to deliver to this audience. It's having a really detailed strategy about that basically that funnel, about how you're going to take people from a wide number of people through to a core number of people that may have the potential to do business with you, but through taking them through a journey where you're learning about them, delivering something of value, learning about them, delivering something more of value. So to put that into context, one business in particular we worked with had a target audience, delivered an ad set to them, which was asking them about whether they experienced a particular challenge. The next part of that was getting them to watch a little video which helped them with that challenge, no selling whatsoever, just helping them with the challenge. The next part of it was remarketing to that audience to deliver even more valuable content. And there's about 4 stages to this, constantly remarketing, giving them more content, to the final point where we then invited them to an event where they could go and learn about something in even more detail. So all of that funnel was around identifying a need, delivering value, to the point where they could really build up an engagement with that group and give them something that's going to really help them, as opposed to just like smashing them with ads left, right and center, which are just designed to try and get them to buy something.
That sounds like the best approach, really. It sounds to me a more considered and detailed approach, rather than, as we've discussed, these kind of one size fits all buckets of people, is the way forward. And I think that is even more relevant in the professional services content, where if you link that with assessment based marketing, as you were talking about earlier, you can start to mine that data and that knowledge about the audience pre-personalization. I just want to touch quickly before we wrap the panel up. There'll be something, it sounds to me like there's a lot of confusion. You know, the ICO is unclear. My esteemed co-chair on the creative and digital committee, Steve Kuncevich, periodically keeps me updated with goings on from the ICO. I have no idea what he's talking about most of the time, and I think sometimes they're a bit muddled too. So there's bound to be confusion amongst marketing professionals. What can we do? What should we do? And also, like we're always hearing different things about the law and about technology. So I just want to, as I say, before we wrap up, just briefly bring in a mention of DuckDuckGo and browsers like Microsoft Edge, where tracking cookies and third-party cookies are kind of off by default, and it's a more first-party based experience. So for the people in the audience who are, you know, even further behind than me and the ICO, where do we see the impact of this sort of leveling out? When are we going to see an end of third-party cookies, and therefore things like personalization and retargeting and stuff? You know, what's the latest?
Yeah, I think I mean, you know, Google are saying that they're going to be blocking third-party cookies from 2022. You know, the cynic in me says that, you know, the only people who are going to get powerful from doing this are the effectively is the gaffer. You know, they're gonna do very well out of the fact that they're blocking third-party tracking cookies. I think where's it going to go? We're already seeing a lot of the publishers are moving to kind of authenticated environments where you have to log in. You have to be an identified individual. That way they can do more contextual based targeting to the individual, both based on what they're reading, and it's almost like we're going back to the good old days, but, you know, linked to the articles that are being read, but also linked to the information that they can kind of generate from that individual first party data about their preferences. So it is going to move far more back towards a first party data model, which is why, you know, as marketeers, everyone really does need to start thinking about, you know, the quality of their first party data and what they have and the data they're earning and how they're bringing it into the mix. I mean, there are, again, I've heard of lots of other new technologies that are coming to the market to kind of replace the kind of like the cookieless future. But when you scratch them, you know, they still feel unethical to me. You know, it doesn't feel right. And I think often, you know, I'll say to my clients, you know, the question is, if you explain to your grandmother across the table what it is you do, does it sound creepy? And if it does, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. And the thing is, most of these technologies that are coming in as a kind of like a, you know, from a kind of to replace this cookieless future, do sound a bit creepy when you scratch the surface. So again, it comes back to the ethical frameworks, you know, if and the brands are the ones who are now driving this. And if they're going to start challenging their tech partners to actually really understand how it is they do what they say they do, and if it sounds creepy and they're therefore not prepared to buy it, then I think, you know, it will mean it will drive the industry and the sector to start looking at far more ethical, transparent solutions that actually I think in the long run will deliver a much better experience both for the individual and for the brand themselves.
Fantastic. And that's a really good note to end on there. Thank you, Jay. And thank you to Alex and Mike as well. It's a fascinating topic. It's one we could discuss all day, probably. I know that Jay could write about it all day, having read his emails. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, these guys, particularly Jay, you know, experts on this. So please do get in touch via the usual channels if you have questions or you'd like to speak to any of our panelists throughout the day. But once again, thank you to Jay, Alex and Mike.